an original.
From Story Studio Network.
I'm Tom Hoppe, and I'm your host of the Most Painful Podcast. On the last episode, we spoke to Dr. Venue Caparati about neuroplasticity to heal the brain and mind conditions. This includes depression, PTSD, chronic pain, and addictions. This is a very interesting topic, and if you missed this episode, you can listen to it on our Spotify and Apple feed. And remember to hit the subscribe and like button to get the most up-to-date episodes. So re-injury is a common occurrence after an initial injury, especially in sports or occupations such as the military. Today I'm joined by Daniel Crumback, Director of Strategic Health and Performance, to talk to us about his research project to help decrease re-injury rates in the Canadian Armed Forces. However, this information will also be helpful to non-military members. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, good to talk to you all the way from the UK this morning. And So maybe just give us a really short, brief background of who you are and what you do, and we'll start talking about the topic.
Well, I did 30 years in the Canadian Army, all the way through private, all the way and retired as a major. In the medical branch as a physiotherapist. So I was the physiotherapist in charge of Eastern Canada for a while, and then Western Canada when I retired. I am a physiotherapist, sport physiotherapist. I'm a clinical exercise physiologist, strength conditioning coach, and a high performance coach, and a chartered activity and health practitioner. So I have this weird combination of backgrounds that allows me to be able to look at things from a different point of view. A more holistic approach. So after I retired from the military in 2017, I was the head of performance and rehabilitation, working with Chinese Olympic athletes for 2 years in Beijing, China, and all through China, working, and also was the head therapist for China at the 2018 Winter Olympics. From there, I went to Athens, Greece, as the head of science and education, working for a metabolic analysis company. So if you think about resting metabolic rates and VO2 maxes and its current popularity. I did that for 2 years. Then I moved to England. I met my wife, who's English, in China while I was there. So I moved to the south of England, and I was a lecturer at University of Chichester in physiotherapy and physiology. And now I live way up north in Cumbria, where I run strategic health performance. And as you stated, I was also in charge of sales for Europe and Africa for another metabolic analysis company named Core.
You're a very busy person. Quite a career. So, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, so it's nice, I guess, to have that exposure in different parts of the world, which I agree with you, brings a nice perspective. So let's talk about this re-injury. Maybe you can how did the project start? What were the outcomes? And we can go from there.
All right. Well, as a physiotherapist in the Canadian military, particularly when I'd been posted to Borden, Ontario, and I was working, it was a training base. And so every base is slightly different with this population. Obviously, they were quite young. They're only in that base for a short period of time, unless they were posted there. But more than likely, a large part of the population was just in there for a short period of time. And they were withstanding high levels of training. So you were seeing high levels of injuries with the younger population. And I kept seeing those people coming back over and over for the same issue. When I got posted, after my tour to Afghanistan, I got posted to Special Operations, and it gave me a little more time working in the Canadian Special Operations Regiments, working with that population, which is highly trained, and they're more permanent. And it allowed me to be able to kind of study them a little bit more. So the one thing I noticed was that what we were, in my opinion, watching the whole thing was the reason why they were coming back with, let's say they had a left shoulder injury, you'd see them 6 months later for a left shoulder injury or some complication of that. So in other words, either neck or upper thoracic spine or arm problems associated on the same side. Was that we weren't treating the whole area well enough, and we were being way too specific on the particular diagnosis itself. Whereas the diagnosis gets set up by other issues that are in the area. So a lot of times shoulder problems will be secondary to upper thoracic issues or cervical issues or vice versa. So the trick is, it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. The trick is to fix the problem in the area and therefore change the stress and strain on the area to allow it to heal, because the body wants to heal. So it came down to me being more of a strength conditioning coach and realizing that we as physios, we're so focused on, joint mobility and range of motion and flexibility, and their pain, that we weren't spending the time on retraining them up to the physiological level that they require to be able to go back to their work. So I felt that there was a real hole there, and that's where everything laid as far as the options. So while I was there, it was a lot easier to work with the performance staff and special operations. It's a different world. You have much more support and much more control over that population. So my next posting was into Halifax, Nova Scotia, working with the Navy. Again, different injuries, different population. And I started putting together the idea of, they had a couple of programs running when I arrived there, which I thought was really good. So I would watch the programming, but from a strength and conditioning point of view, I felt that there was not enough, there was no grounding in strength and conditioning, applying the right loads for the right period of time, to be able to cause the physiological changes, and then also notice the functional changes, whether be it strength or endurance or power. So I worked with them to be able to come up with a system in which we could test, because sometimes the injury is, let's say it's an acute injury, they've never had it before, and you saw them within 2 weeks of having the injury. Well, that they're not going to have the deficits around that strength and all the other issues that are going on around the area. They hadn't developed yet. So the whole idea was to be able to test the person to determine where they should start and when they're done in relation to the occupation that they had. So there was a long process of kind of observing it and realizing on my physiology side, it was sort of like, well, what am I going to use for a test? How I'm going to use the testing protocol to be able to determine where they start and where they go. How do I know when they're done? So that's essentially how the whole thing started.
So can you give an example of when someone comes in with an acute injury, what are you looking for? What's the process you're going through, and how does that prevent re-injury?
All right. So if you're with the acutes, it's a little bit easier, right?
Okay.
The traditional physio approach, because there hasn't been the deconditioning or the change in the movement patterning,
right,
that you would have with somebody with a more chronic injury or a previous injury in the same area. So this is the problem with using the acute, and I couldn't use the word acute and I couldn't use the word traumatic during my research, because acute to somebody is, I bent over to pick up a pen and I couldn't get back up. To the average person, that's an acute traumatic injury, where it's not really. There's no application of external load. So I had to come up with whole different ways of describing what that is. So if it's a first injury, right, and no previous injuries and no injury in the area, then it's fairly simple to be able to get good joint mechanics, good range of motion, flexibility, reestablish stability and strength around the area, and likelihood of them being injured is lower. But you've got somebody who's had an injury, 2 or 3 times in the same area, and that's the problem. It can't be shoulder, anything. So I defined it as regions, so neck, upper thoracic, shoulder, arm. Anything in that area would represent a previous injury in that area itself.
So if someone comes in with a shoulder, if I come into you with a shoulder injury, for example, I've had it dealt with before. Now it's reappeared.
Yeah.
What are you talking about in that, just to help the audience kind of visualize, what are you talking about in that area? I mean, the shoulder, complex joint, obviously, a little bit.
Yep.
So what makes it different now? What are you looking at that's different? I'm coming back to you with that, my shoulder's sore again. How are we working with that?
Right. Well, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of the physios and a lot of the clients themselves will want that diagnosis. You know, I have bicipital tendonitis. I have a minor rotator cuff tear. I have AC joint problems. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I spent the first 5 years really hammering the fact I get to diagnose. And after about 10 years, I went, I don't care. It doesn't matter anymore. What are the deficits that I'm finding? So the trick is to be able to assess the neck, upper thoracic, shoulder area complex as one. And you're going to find deficits in the other areas.
Because they're compensating, right?
They may have been a problem in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, the shoulder may be the victim. So I always play a game of victim and culprit. And when I challenge my physios in the military, and they'll tell you that I was a difficult guy to deal with when it came to diagnosis and treatment protocols. I was very demanding on my physios to be more analytical and more to be able to treat the whole area and understand that the physiology hasn't changed at all. And therefore their function really hasn't changed. Yes, they can lift their arm overhead without having pain anymore, but that's not going to get them back to work. And you're going to see them again. Because
it's other parts that are affecting it. So muscle from the neck, or I'm trying to keep it base, so people can visualize this. But I'm a very strong advocate of manual therapy and manipulation. So a lot of cases, muscle and tendon are real victims of joint limitations. Okay.
So a lot of cases, what you'll find is you'll have a locked up thoracic spine rib complex. That is leading to the scapula being held in a different position, which will lead to things like impingement syndrome. And everybody will refer to that as being, well, that's your shoulder problem. You have impingement syndrome. And I'm going, yeah, whatever. The fact is, if I don't get that joint rib complex moving properly, I can't get the scapula in good position and therefore take the load off, the stress and strain off the tissue that's being affected.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right? So you're trying to find the root of the problem in a sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, that's the fun part, and this is why as a physiologist, my brain works more like a physiologist. If we're seeing that there's a cardiovascular limitation, yeah, but why? I have to look at all the other systems to determine whether they're contributing, a limitation there is contributing to them, their cardiovascular response. So the fact is, a lot of cases, physiological limitations are really related to a different system showing itself in some other system itself.
So that kind of makes sense now. So this is why you're saying the re-injury occurred. I go in, we'll stick with the shoulder, I guess. I go in, my shoulder's sore. You do the whole ice back tens exercise.
Yeah. I hope not, but yes.
Yeah. Everywhere's different. And then 3-4 months, I'm coming back with the same issue on the re-injury. Is that a common process for any part of the body? Like if I'm playing hockey, I get smashed in the knee. How does a re-injury work on that? Is it still the same process where this was a direct impact to a joint. We'll use that as an example. Maybe I'm wrong. You can provide a better example. Is that still the same where it could have been caused from somewhere else? Or is that more clear because it was a direct impact to a part?
Yeah, the application of an external force. And that's the way I applied it. So either, let's say you're playing hockey and you get nailed in the boards and you separate your shoulder. Was there anything in place before that could have led to you not separating your shoulder? Don't know, but more than likely, I would treat a application of external force on a joint as being different. Not that I wouldn't assess everything again. Versus, let's say somebody who noticed that they have patellofemoral pain, so kneecap pain related to running, and they are increasing their load a little bit, and they notice that their left knee is hurting. My favorite question, and I do this all the time to physios, is, well, it's because of the load. I'm going, no, unless they're running on one leg. Why doesn't their other knee hurt then, if it had to do with load? There's obviously a pre-existing setup that has not been recognized that's leading to it being demonstrated through that side. So the answer is yes, it could be top down, as I refer to it. So it could be a chronic back issue affecting hip and pelvis, leading to issues around the knee. In other words, the victim's the knee, despite the culprit being the back, hip, and pelvis. Or it could even be a foot. Like if you notice a major asymmetry in the pronation of their foot, it could be a bottom up, in which that foot's collapsing more, leading to increased stress at the knee. Knee tends to be, unless it's traumatic, tends to be a victim of everything else, either bottom up or top down. More likely, 90% of the time, it's top down. Now what you're seeing is how I built my regions. So, as far as I was concerned, there's a spinal pelvis hip with top-down knee issues is another region, just like the neck, upper thoracic, and shoulder are a region. And the other one is foot, knee, foot, ankle. So those are different ones. Much harder during my research, much harder to find because there doesn't tend to be as many of the chronic things around. An ankle tends to be 90% of the time an ankle sprain, right. But it'll be things like shin splints or compression syndrome. And if it's unilateral, there's something going on that side, or there's something going on the other side, more likely the ipsilateral side. And there's all kinds of clues. Like if you have a spinal problem, is if you dare to take off a person's shirt and have a look at them, the side of the convexity of a curve, so they'll more likely will have a scoliosis of some form, will indicate the side of the issue. So there's all of this was leading to, can I see it? Can I test it? Can I recognize it? And then what do I do with that information to be able to get them so that they're functional enough to be able to return to work? And that was the creation of the Rehab for Performance program that I created, along with other staff members within the group, obviously, and also with Lyndall Gregg. I want to give her a shout out. She was a performance coach, believe it or not, at a different base. And we just worked back and forth between Edmonton and Victoria and Esquimalt. And because I wanted a performance coach involved, not that I'm not qualified, but I wanted to bring them on board because I realized the issue was there was a lack of integration between the performance staff that were at every base and the physiotherapy department. And there was misunderstandings, there was turf wars, there was just really poor logistics and organization. And part of it became this whole thing with chronic pain. And I just have so much issue that we're the ones that are causing people to get into this point of view. And I would blame physios.
In what point of view would that be? Like, may you clarify that?
Because we're not dealing with it properly in the first place.
You're not dealing with the root cause. So you're trying to get people to get out of that tunnel vision and look beyond just that single point of injury.
Correct. Not only the client, but the physios, because, the last thing I want to do, and I was fervently against it in the military, was to give lectures on pain, to tell them how pain works, and that's why they have it, and they're just going to have to deal with it. It's just part of life, and they need to find some way of moving on. And you're just going, that's not why they came to see us. They didn't come for a lecture, and they didn't come to be your friend. And I kept telling my physios, you can sit there, but I've never seen anybody talk anybody better. I've never seen anybody test anybody better. But I have seen people treat and give proper exercise programming to make them better. So in a lot of cases, that was my drive of R4P, was I created a inclusion criteria that the physios had to follow. If they met this criteria, they must refer into this program. And then I used some things working with our occupational therapist. I used some things like the scales to determine whether there's some pre-existing belief structures around pain. They were the only ones that got a lecture. I don't want to lecture everybody on pain. I don't want them to pay attention to pain in the first place. I want them to pay attention to function. So if we identified anybody where there could be a mental block towards or fear of activity while I'm about to put them in the program, they would get a lecture on it to prepare them for what they're about to experience and realize that they're not causing further damage. And that was revolutionary at the time. It was sort of everybody goes in, just identify those that are at risk, and give them what they need, but not 6 1-hour lectures on it. It's like 30 minutes on it, quit concentrating on it, move on, and pay attention over time. And they would be referred into the program that way.
Which is interesting you talk about that. And I understand where you're coming from with, as you know, too, in the science and that is pain education or knowledge is a way of helping with chronic pain, understanding how it's connected, biopsychosocial and that. But what you're saying is initially when someone's coming to see you, let's focus on my shoulder or whatever it is and focus on where that's being caused from and how we can get that movement back and get the person back to work in a sense and not to have a re-injury, right? And
retrain them to change their physiology. This is most of the training programs are too light of load, they're too short. Physio exercise programming is absolutely horrible. I really appreciate the guys in physio or girls in physio that have gone to the trouble of learning strength conditioning and applying the concepts. But it's hard. It takes 8, 12 weeks to 16 weeks to actually change physiology and truly change function. Well, how many physios are giving out 16-week programs with loads that change every 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah.
Because that's what has to happen. We know this is strength conditioning science. That's what has to happen. And I think we could get out of this. Just the discussion over pain has just taken over everything. And I find, I know this is a horrible thing to say, but the ones that concentrate on teaching, and this is working in China with physios, working in the UK, working in the United States and Canada. There's some people that are just absolutely not very good physios. They'll lecture a lot on pain. And it's because they're not providing the treatment. They're never seeing their people get better. So it's a lot easier to lecture them and prepare them for being unsuccessful with treatment.
That's a different approach. And I mean, I've been in and out of physio, both in the military and outside the military. And I'm, the worst, of course, is you get injured in the military, you go to physio for about 2 weeks and you're back in the field again. Boom. And then you wonder why years down the road, you still got the same problem with, or then you go to the other physios where it's 15-minute hot pack and attends and they're off with someone else. And then you go to the ones, and I have to give a shout out to the one in Kingston Movement Performance Center, where it's exactly what you were saying. It's about strength training. It's about performance. And that was my first experience with that. Had a better outcome until, you go to an IDC, interdisciplinary pain clinic, where everything is under one roof, medical, physiotherapy, and it's strength training, and it's a whole body approach. Yeah. But I guess it depends where a person goes. And I guess this is part of what we're doing here is to educate people so they're aware and they can decide maybe there's other options out there for a better recovery, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think part of it is population identification. Like I did my master's on, can we take an uninjured population? And I took 400 uninjured military personnel, put them through 17 different movement-based tests and a looking back at their history and everything else. And could we predict injury in the future with this group? And the answer was yes. We could with upper quadrant, and in other words, neck, thoracic spine, shoulder, and we could with spine and hip and pelvis and top-down knee. Ankle foot was different because most of the injuries were acute ankle sprains and everything else. And I don't think you could predict acute anything like traumatic injury. So I threw out all of those. So I was the first study that actually worked with completely uninjured population and threw out all of the traumatic injuries themselves because, of course, we can't predict them. And we were able to predict very well those people that had breakdown in the next year. And I figured it was a combination of previous injury, some kind of movement deficit, some kind of strength deficit, and some form of pain during movement, which was, these 4 things I figured would show. And that's exactly what showed up as the predictors, a combination of those 4 things.
Yeah.
Up to this point, this is something that that should be used with people before they're injured. And they have the opportunity to be able to then fix those deficits that have been identified and therefore decrease their risk of injury.
I know it all sounds fascinating, and I could actually talk for another half an hour easily on this. But just to close off, what would be one takeaway or tip for the audience to help them prevent re-injury? Something simple, and I know that might be a tough one to ask, but what would pop in your mind there that would help somebody?
I would say, number one, don't wait to be injured. Ideally, in my world, what you'd be able to do is do a screen to determine your risk of future injury from non-traumatic injury, which would be the proper use of my research. Then what you would do is I essentially use the same programming that I was talking about that I designed for the military to undo the risk. I would say don't wait. If you've got a niggle, then get in before it affects your function.
Okay.
Because you're allowing that movement deficit and change to be able to get really honed in there. It's easier to fix earlier, and it'll make a big difference in your recovery time. And I think you still reach the same point, but where it could take you 6 weeks, it could take you 16 weeks to get fully low risk.
So listen to your body and then address any of the issues before they get worse.
Find physios that really promote strength conditioning as well. As far as I'm concerned, if I couldn't manipulate and I couldn't needle and I couldn't assess as well as I did, in combination with the app, get them in loading as quickly as possible, but at high loads and high levels for at least a 12 to 16 week period. Look for people that do that.
Perfect. Well, this has been great. Lots of good. Like I said, I could probably talk longer on it, but I really appreciate your time on this.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
For feedback about the show or more information on chronic pain, you can visit our website, veteranschronicpain.ca, or follow us on Facebook and X at Chronic Pain COE and on Instagram at Chronic Pain _COE. For the audience, stay safe and keep the hope alive.
The Most Painful Podcast is produced for the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence by Story Studio Network.